Hey everybody, Eric with Solobox. So I just spent the entire day out here in the shop reworking the helmet top box to add the angled ends. And so I ruined some metal today and I updated some jigs. I built some new stuff and it was a fairly productive day, but literally I've been out here this entire day trying to redesign and build one single box. But it's done. I can replicate these now, so I've got the jigging to do it, and so I'm happy about that. So anyway, I spent the day also shooting a bunch of video showing what it took to go through and redesign this box and fix the jigging and go through that entire thing. So if you're interested in watching that, stay tuned. All right, so I'm trying to decide exactly where I want that angle to come to. I'm thinking somewhere in this area so that it'll bend back. This part will actually be eliminated, and then the bend will extend across the front here and should take care of that dishing. So just taking some basic measurements here and thinking somewhere in this area right here. Got my jig laid out over there, and so I'm going to be making some modifications to this piece here that'll allow the layout to be really quick and easy. So I'm thinking about from this corner here, I'm thinking I'm going to come up about 4.5 inches, and we'll try putting it there. We'll build a box and just see how it comes out, see if it works. If it does, it'll go into production. One more quick word about trying to figure out the layout for this angle is that it becomes much more complicated. You can't just do a straight line on the jig and figure it out, because you've got this 45 here to contend with, and trying to figure out exactly how to do your layout and your cuts to make sure that everything fits totally flush. Because once you cut this part out, having that 45 in the middle of it really complicates things. So it took me actually quite a bit of effort to figure out the math and the layout of exactly how that needed to be done. But luckily most of that work was done when I redesigned the side cases. So now that I know how to do it, this shouldn't be nearly as complicated. All right, so I just finished modifying the jig. I didn't make a brand new one. Instead, I was able to I replaced this jig not too long ago. I was able to actually modify this one. So what you go from is the old box was based on the layout from a single-sided jig. So you have to go from single-sided to a double-sided jig. And the key to making both sides of this jig exactly the same is these little notches. So I use those to help me get it exactly the same on both sides. One thing that's different about this jig, another thing that's different about this jig from the old jig, apart from it being double-sided, is that it also has these little sight glasses with crosshairs on it, which give me layout points. I can punch and mark those, and I'll be able to get my layout exactly where it needs to be. This new stuff is far more accurate than the old stuff, and honestly I'm really kind of hesitant to even show how I do the layout jigs, just because I had to invent all of this stuff. There's still some other stuff in here that I simply will not show people, because the speed at which I'm able to lay out to build the boxes is a lot of the secret to my success. You know, if I was to hand lay out all these, the boxes, for one, they wouldn't come out very good. There would definitely be issues with them in terms of, you know, just trying to get them to look exactly the same every single time. And the speed at which I'm able to do it is greatly increased by having these jigs. And so, you know, the original jigs that I invented were pretty good. But I've learned a lot over the course of like the last 8 or 9 years in terms of what I need and just how to be much more accurate, you know. And that carries over into tools and stuff too. Like, you know, my ability to use this shear has greatly improved over the years, you know. Little subtleties, you know, you'd really be surprised at what 1/2 of a millimeter will do to a box. So anyway, I'm going to shut the camera off for a second and lay out the first box, and then we'll get started on trying to build it. We'll see how our work came out. All right, so my layout is complete. Everything looks good. And so now I need to remove some metal. Everything that's on the far side of this line all has to come out of here. Now, outside cuts are really easy. You could just throw it in the shear and make a cut, but these are all inside cuts, and I have to do both sides of the sheet. So I'm going to try to do what I can of it over on the notcher. If I get lucky, I'll be able to remove all of that on the notcher. If not, then I'll have to get into the bandsaw to do part of it. But the new side cases, I can remove most of it with the notcher, but I still have to pull out the bandsaw every single time, every sheet. So wish me luck. Let's go find out how it goes. Alright, let's see what we can do here. So see, already I'm into a spot where I can't get to that with the notcher without the other end of the notcher out in the middle of the metal, where I can't make a cut out there. So I'm going to how can I deal with that? Yeah, that's not gonna work. I don't want to ruin the sheet. So that little tab, this little spot right here, I'm going to have to do, like it or not, with the bandsaw every single time I build one of these boxes. Really complicates the build over the old stuff, but the finished result, I think it's definitely worth it. It's going to take a lot more of my time when I go to build. So, I guess it is what it is. The truth is, I kind of enjoy building boxes anyway, so why not just enjoy it? Or do my best to enjoy it. Definitely a little bit more time consuming. Alright, so here's one side of it, and I could remove some more of this, but it's not going to matter. That line and that line are both going to have to be cut with the bandsaw. So I'm going to turn the camera off, notch the other side of this, and then we'll head over to the brake and bend some metal. Not so quick. I gotta head over to the bandsaw first. Alright, so there we go. There's the body of the box ready to be bent up. So it takes quite a bit of effort just to get to this point. But see you over at the break in just a moment. So I've got different series of rods up here, and you can see they're color coded. So depending on what parts I'm trying to build, depends which color I need to choose. So for top boxes, it's the yellow stuff. Now there's only 2 rods here because I only really need to make 90s and 45s normally when I build a top box. But having the new angled end caps, I'm gonna have to make a new rod. So we'll see what that angle needs to be, and we'll figure that out later on. I might get that today, might not. But anyway, the longer one, this is for the 90s. And so I'll slip this into the brake. Grab the sheet. Line it up. Clamp it down and make my bend. Ninety at the other end. This little 90 I'm bending now, this is a little piece that goes around the lip at the top of the box where the lid will actually sit down on top of this. So that's that bend. Now I got to do the 45s. Switch it over to a 45 bend and just grab the other rod, flip it onto the machine. Clamp it down, take my bend, release it, move it off to the next one, lined up, down, take my bend, swap it around, down. Alright, that's the basic shape of the new body of the box, all bent up. Now I got to get on with redesigning the end caps. All right, so we've already run into a little bit of an issue here, which is pretty typical with trying to work up something new. What I've come to discover is that when you try to lay a flat plate on here, you see that there's a bit, where am I at here? A little bit of a gap there, a little bit too much showing through right. It's really hard to hold the camera and show you this exactly how it needs to be shown, but there's a little bit too much of a gap is my overall point right about here. And that correlates with this hole here, and so I've already made myself a note to move this hole down. So what I'll end up doing before I build the next box is I'll use the welder to put some aluminum back into this hole, and I'll smooth it down with a sanding disc, make this perfectly flush again, change the position of this and move it down a millimeter or so, and re-drill it so that it's the same on both sides. So that'll hopefully take care of that little bit of gap here. I'll be able to fill this in when I go to weld the end cap on. It'll be okay. I'll still make a perfectly decent box out of it. It's just not quite as tight as it should be. So that's just kind of part of the deal. So anyway. More trouble in paradise. So when I made that first original cut off of the main sheet through here that you guys saw, I actually reached up here and grabbed the wrong jig. I grabbed one of these. They now say lid on them. They didn't say lid before. So I grabbed one of these and I made the body length based on one of these when it was supposed to be based on this. So this is just a waste of metal. Same thing happened when I redesigned the side cases. Well, not the same thing exactly, but same thing in terms of, you know, it's the cost of doing business. You know, you try to redesign something, you're gonna create some waste. Actually, this metal, I'll still end up doing something probably with it, cutting it up. Maybe I'll make dashboards for KLRs or something out of it, but so all that effort to this point has been for naught. But the good news is, since there's still a little bit of an issue here with the jig, I'm gonna go ahead and fix the jig like I just said. I'll get that part right. I'll lay out a new one to the correct length, and I'll get back with you in a minute here. All right, I am real pleased. So I went ahead and fixed the jig. You can kind of tell where this has been ground down. I moved that hole down a couple of millimeters on both sides, and did all the work that was required to fix that. I made a new body. Actually built it to the correct specifications this time. Yeah, call me crazy. So I will show you now. This is what I was after before. Let's see if you guys can see this, how there's no gap in there. No, there is, but it's very, very small. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like. Whereas the other one had a couple of millimeters like right in here. So that is fixed. This is the first body that's done to the correct dimensions. And so now it's on to building end caps. So this is the jig that I usually build the end caps for the old top box. And so the only thing I should really have to change about this is that I'll need to make it a couple of millimeters longer because of that bend, because it'll take more metal to reach the bottom of the box. So I'm just gonna basically, the width should be normal. This part up here, it does the lip around the top. That's all gonna stay the same. Like I said, the only thing I should really need to add is just a little bit down here at the bottom. A couple millimeters will generally do it. So I'm gonna get on with cutting a little bit of metal. I'll make up, I'll probably just make one and make sure, do a test fit, try to figure out what this angle is, and I'll get back to you in a second. All right, since I technically won't need this jig anymore, which is the end cap jig for the old box, what I decided to do was scribe a line here, and I'll bend that to make this upper lip part, and I'll just use this as a scrap piece basically to get an idea of where this bend is going to need to go. So rather than have it go to waste, I may as well, oh, and I'll also be able to figure out how much longer it needs to be, hopefully. So let's go ahead and put the 90 in it real quick. Uh-oh. There's Leo. What are you doing, Leo? Okay, I'm glad we talked about that. Alright, so send the 90 into this. Let's see kind of where we're at. So I forgot to notch this. This needs a notch in it. It's not going to line up right. This will give me an idea of about where I'm going to need to make this bend. When I redesigned the side cases, this bend needed to be about 10 degrees. So I don't know. We'll see what that's going to be. But anyway, I'm going to put a couple notches in this real quick and try to figure out where this line needs to go and get back to you. All right, I'm on what they call a roll. So once that bend is in there, you can't notch it. So forget about that game plan. What I did here is I made another end cap that's set to the correct width, but I didn't set the length. I made it extra long. And so what I did is I laid out, this is where the 90-degree bend needs to go. I took some measurements on here, sort of a guesstimate, and decided that this is going to need to be about 137 millimeters. And so I'm going to set that line right here at 137. It's written on here. So I'll bend this stuff up and see how it fits. Yeah, you got to put your shoes on. So anyway, I'm going to bend this stuff up, and based on what I end up with, I should be able to make an end cap jig that I could use in the future. So wish me luck. All right, so I've got this mocked up, a couple of vice grips holding it in place. And so I set the length here at 309. You can see 309 was just a little bit long. So when I go to make the jig, I'll have to shorten that up. Looks like by about 3 millimeters or so. Got my angle here, just overbent it by just a tad bit, but that's actually looking really good. These, of course, have to get trimmed off, but this is what I'm after. That's nice and tight. This is looking really good. So I'm going to go ahead and, based on what I just learned, I'm going to build a little jig for making the end caps. Looks like the bend is in just the right spot. So I'm going to make a jig, and then we'll get with making 2 good end caps, and then we'll weld it up. All right, so the end cap jig is complete, and I built 2 end caps based on that jig. The first one is on here. It's just being held on with these 2 clamps, but you can see that you can't really do a whole lot better than that. It's just about as perfect as you're ever going to get it. So I'm happy with the jig. I went ahead and I buy this 5/8 inch rod from Home Depot in 8-foot lengths, and I keep it around the shop specifically so that I can make these for the brake. So that new bend that needs to go in the end cap right here is going to be based on that particular rod. And of course I color coordinated it in yellow so it'll match the other stuff. So that's all done. And so I'm just getting ready to set up the welder to do some aluminum. I'll tack up both ends of this box, weld it up, and we'll see what we end up with. All right, the lid dimensions haven't changed at all, so I'm just going to go ahead and use the lid jigs as they are and whip up one lid for this and try to make sure that that's going to fit properly. I've had a lot of trouble in the past with getting lids to fit right. If they're just slightly overbent on the brake or something, then there won't be enough room to get the hinge and the latch on, and yeah, yada yada. I've definitely had issues there, so I'm going to go ahead and build one to the exact specs of the old lid and see if it doesn't fit. dude. There we go. Here's a comparison of two of them, the old one and the new one, kind of back to back. I was a little bit concerned because I'm taking a little of the volume out of this one by having the angled ends, that maybe helmets wouldn't fit in it anymore. And so I was just kind of checking, see how that, this is my dirt bike helmet. There's plenty of room in here, so I don't think anybody will have any issue getting their helmet to fit. And that's specifically what this helmet, or this top box was designed to do, is fit a helmet. This one's got my road helmet in it. So they're both about the same. Doesn't really seem to make any difference. So my primary objective was to get rid of this dishes slightly because of all the heat when I weld. And so this one, I'm really pleased. It's nice and flat. It's perfect. So this is just a nicer box. It's built better because the tolerances are just more tight. So it's got a little bit of shape to it, not a lot. I'm going to go ahead and put some hinges on it and a latch and some footman loops, and we'll see how it looks.